Okay, we are starting the stream. We're gonna make this one a pretty short one. Didn't do much promotion for it, just a quick post about an hour ago. We'll start posting these on the Meetup group and the Facebook page more in advance so that you can schedule them. But the plan is every Thursday at 7:30 p.m. We'll be reviewing, analyzing deals, either ones that we look at ourselves or ones that you send us in the live chat with addresses that you want to analyze. So I'm going to go ahead and start it off. And let me just get my situation set up. Okay, perfect. All right, so let's go ahead and start looking at some deals. Okay, so we're going to pull up some deals. Why don't we go ahead and this is the flips page, by the way. If you're looking for deals on Pellego, this is where you can see them. You have to be a client to get to here. You can still type in an address up here. Okay, cool. So let's take a look at some of these. So these are pretty small profits. These look. Let's find something a little junkier, a little more standard. The Seattle one could be interesting. Looks like it's been on market a while. Let's give ourselves maybe something in Tacoma. Tacoma is always a good example one. Nothing in Tacoma right now. Okay, no. Oh, really? Okay, let's go in the Seattle one. Okay. So when you show up on Pellego, you see these. First, you see the property tab. You got these 5 tabs up here: property, comps, rehab, flip, and rental. You start on the property tab where all the property information is. So you've got the photos here. You've got a map, a street view. You've got the listing information as well as a history. And over here on the right, you can see all the structural information. So about the parcel, about the structure, and even any permits if there's any on hand. In this case, there's not. There's also this parcel number that you can click. And when you click that, it brings you to the county website for that property. So you can go there if you ever want to go deep dive. You don't have to click anything. It just automatically click like command or control before you click. It just opens up another tab automatically. Okay, the next tab is the comps tab. So the comps tab is really there to help you find comps that are going to be relevant specifically for flipping. Now, you can use it for things that aren't flipping. You can get it to try to find a sense of the as-is condition. But for the purposes of what we'll talk about now, we'll talk about the flip condition. So by default, Pellego tries to predict which comps are going to be the most relevant when you go ahead and flip your property after you've rehabbed it. When you finally go to resell it, what's the most likely price that you will ultimately sell it for, which is what we call the after repair value or the ARV. And you can see it over here is where that number is inputted. You can also see the Pellego ARV, which is what it starts as at the top. But this is a number that you can edit if you want. And we'll get back to that in a moment. The main thing you're going to do is use this map and use these arrows to go through the comps. Now you can see you can click here and you can also move them around. So the first comp looks great. You know, as I look through this property, just that structure style right there, when you switch between them, it feels really relevant. You know, as we look through this, you can see there's a lot of work that's going to be needed. We'll get into the specifics of that property later. But this comp, I'm guessing it's pretty nice on site, and it is perfect. Awesome. So this gives us a really good sense of what our property can be after we fix it up. So this sold for $505, and you can see that sales price right here, $505, and it has what we call an adjusted value over here on the left for $494,000. So what that means is that the property sold for $505,000, but between the differences in the structure and when it sold, we have adjusted that 505 value to 494. So if you click that, you can see how we've made those assumptions. Now, if you disagree with one of these assumptions, then you can say, hey, I don't really trust that. For instance, I'm not quite sure what this is going on right here, but it looks like there is they got the same no basement and we're subtracting. So I might want to look into that. Is that just a bug, or is that trying to say something that it's doing it poorly? But you can start going through the assumptions. You can see that we actually added 75,000 for the market appreciation. So it's June 2017 when it's sold, and it's basically a year later. If we look at the appreciation, which actually you can find on the flip tab, you can see that in this area we're getting, sorry, let me go back, about a 17% appreciation trend over time. So that's where we get this 505, where we get the stronger market of 75,000 added on. So 505, 75,000, that's about 15% increase. So slightly below the number we had for the trend going forward. If you scroll down, you can see a side-by-side comparison between the subject property and the comp. So you can kind of see what feels right, doesn't feel right. So notice again, this one is much bigger. It's quite a bit bigger. And so the adjusted value has minus 320 square feet, and that takes away that 70,000. So even though we gained 75,000 from when that property sold, we lost 70,000 in terms of what the structure, the size compared to the comp. So it's basically a wash to think about that. But if it theoretically, this adjusted value of 494 is only relevant in today's market. We're not projecting this appreciation beyond today. So if you think the appreciation will hold, this Pellego ARV and this ARV here is going to be too small. So keep that in mind. So you can go through these comps and get a sense for this adjusted value. And if you want, you can use the Pellego thumbs up, thumbs down, which is going to help you make the Pellego ARV related to the adjusted value. So if let's try to find a crazy comp here. Okay, let's find this. All these comps are just really good here. Okay, but if we were to theoretically thumbs down this comp, this 493 ARV here, this Pellego ARV up here, if you thumbs it down, it would change just slightly, like a tiny little bit. And that's because it is using this adjusted value to get to that. So theoretically, if you said, hey, I actually only want to care about some of these outlier comps, like I really like this one, you could thumbs up only those ones and thumbs down only the other ones. In practice, I find that just looking at the adjusted value and just seeing, okay, those ones are 484 compared to this one, which is 494, which I guess in this case is almost identical. It helps you really normalize those properties, gets you a sense of it, and you don't have to necessarily do the thumbs up, thumbs down every single time. So that's how I would do that. But if you do thumbs up, thumbs down it, and you click save, you'll be able to reference that later. So we also have the rehab tab. The rehab tab is kind of like the comps tab, but with a focus on, well, the rehab, which is your renovation process, how much it's going to cost you to fix up the property in order to get that after repair value and that final resale value. So you'll notice a bunch of stuff on the page. On the left side, there's listing information. There's the listing remarks as well as photo gallery that comes from the listing. So you can see what's uploaded in general on that property and what's available. And as you think about how much is it going to cost me, you might want to see all of these property photos at the same time. So you can kind of scroll through and say, hey, what's the general condition? You can still click in and dive into each of these photos, but we find that sometimes it can be helpful to look at all of them. In the middle, there's this rehab guide. So it's got light, it's got maintenance, light, medium, heavy rehab, and to the studs. So it's not any specific one by default. In this case, it was set to heavy rehab and this level of rehab budget. Now, you could change this. And I want to make a note here. If you move this to the left, this thing didn't change at all. This is your source of truth. This is the rehab budget you're going to go for. So if you're going to spend 90,000, you can type that in, even though this is not on that range. So this range is really just to help guide you. So if you think, hey, you're going to have to replace all non-structural elements of the subject property, then it's probably going to cost somewhere in this range, assuming a GC markup and sales tax. If you're your own general contractor, you might find it's a lot cheaper, but you probably won't be quite as you probably won't be using these guides quite as much. And if you're brand new and you're thinking, oh boy, am I going to get ripped off? Is the GC going to spend more? It's certainly possible. And on the retail side of things, consumers often pay more prices than this. But generally speaking, if you get a bunch of bids, we find that we've got a 25% general contractor markup, which more often than not feels like the right amount. So kind of big takeaway here is use the photos, use the information, use what you know to kind of ballpark it initially with this budget, and then over time hone into that exact number. Now, if we go to the flip tab, and you remember I typed in 90,000 here, if we go to the flip tab, you'll see all the numbers that we typed in before. So there's some sort of decimal place thing going on here. Let's get rid of that. But that's not the original 494 that we started with. It's the after we changed this comp right here. So if I add that comp back in, notice that this number did not change. That number is now your custom ARV up here. The Pellego ARV, however, is going to use that number. So looks like it did give us a different one as before. So we'll have to look at it if we thumbs down something else. But anyways, as you go to your flip tab, you'll see, hey, that number's there as the number you typed in. So if this is, you're thinking, you know what, I'm going to sell for 500,000, and this appreciation is not being used because I haven't checked that, and I am planning to spend 90 on the rehab, we're planning on making a whopping $2,000 on the flip. So you're thinking, okay, well, the next step is how much can I actually pay for it? So if you edit either the purchase price or the profit, it'll change the other. Now, it's not a direct relationship. It's not if you add 20,000 here, it'll take away 20,000 on the purchase price. And the reason is because there are costs that are based on the purchase price, such as the purchase loan. So if you were to say, add a 0 here, which has a couple of rounding, like there's a lot of circular rounding here. So be aware that the number could be off by sometimes a couple $100, even in the rounding. It'll show you that you would need to offer 329,000, or more realistically, 330,000 is what you would go for if you wanted that $20,000 profit before the appreciation. Which, if you're spending 90, might be a little tight, especially since you really be banking on that appreciation. There's also this thing, offer probability, right here. So this is actually a client-only benefit. So if you're a client of ours or you're an agent of ours, you get access to this probability. But we're basically, the system is saying, hey, we think that this deal is not going to work out. There's only a 5% chance that this offer is equal to or greater than the final sales price. So in the final purchase price. So we think that the odds are that this property will ultimately sell for more than this number. 5% doesn't mean it can't happen, and a very high percent doesn't mean that it will happen. But it's certainly something that we take a look at when we think, hey, how much how much do we want to pursue this deal in that first kind of first overview of it. It works much better for on-market deals than off-market deals. If you know the seller already, or you already have rapport with the listing agent, you're going to have perhaps be able to skew these numbers beyond the generic probability. And in reality, the situation of making an offer and negotiating that offer, getting it accepted, is more complicated than just what the price is and the probability is. So something to keep in mind. And I won't go into too many of these details unless anyone out there is interested in anything specific, but the flip tab is really where you dive into the nitty gritty of your deal numbers. So you can change the purchase price, as we showed, the rehab, all of these orange numbers. And there's also these calculations. So in your carrying costs, there are different things that you can read down here. It's a percentage 0.25% of the ARV. You can change that number if you wanted. Likewise, over here, you've got origination fee and another origination fee, one for the purchase loan and one for the rehab loan. And those are based on the numbers over here. So let's say you're using private money and you've got 0%, 0 points, and 0 down payment, and it's just straight interest, and maybe you're paying 6% for it. that's going to dramatically change your cost. So you've got $0 in origination fee now because that's where your points are. But you still have, as a carrying cost, you've got this interest payment, the loan payment. So over the course of these 5 months, that 6% is going to cost you $8,246. So if this was 6 months, that's going to change things, and it's going to cost more. Likewise, if this interest rate was 9% instead of 6%, that's going to cost even more. So all the numbers play back and forth, and it's definitely the kind of thing that you want to understand how each of these numbers play with each other. And I think the most helpful way there is to just read the text underneath, so you get a sense of what we're trying to at least tell you it should be. But certainly, if you have any questions, reach out anytime, either on these live chats or in other ways. And there's help information sometimes right there. You can always ask a question about the property. Final tab to review is the rental tab. So kind of like the flip tab, except believe it or not, it's for rental analysis. And so the idea is here we're focused on, instead of the flip profit, we're focused mostly on cash flow. You can see the same breakdown over here. If you want to change your maintenance budget or your property management, there's also the BRRRR situation. So this is where you fix up the property and refinance the property. So it's buy, rehab, and refinance. So those first couple R's. And the idea is that it's like a flip, and you've increased the value, and now you can refinance based on that new value. And so we've got a little warning here that says that, hey, a lot of this stuff is actually based on the flip tab. So something to look into. Won't go again into every single detail, but keep that in mind that when it comes to certain things like the net equity of your BRRRR, in other words, if you were to sell that property today, what would your profit be? That's going to be considering things like that rehab budget. So play around with it. You can dive into some of these. These all affect different parts of the graphs on the right and the bottom line. You can see, hey, if your refinance is different, might affect those numbers. Your long-term appreciation here, only 3%. If you were to change it to say 5%, you get a much more dramatic beginning, or 8%. It's quite a lot more over time. Likewise, you could increase the rent by more, let's say 5 years, 5%, and that would give you more dramatic. And in total, it would combine here for the total profit. Now, I'm not saying that you should change into these specific percentages, but as an illustration, that's how they work. If you had them, say, both at 3%, what you're going to see is how that would be at 3%. In either case, one thing that's really has always struck me as interesting is how over time the equity of the deal really starts to dominate your profit situation. And more often than not, it seems that as your value of your property goes up, sometimes you might refinance. The rent will certainly go up, but other things go up too. But that value seems to really grow over time. So I think it's really interesting personally to be able to see both the cash flow and the net equity together. In this case, the cash flow is negative. That's why it's below the line. And so this is just not going to be a good rental or a good BRRRR. Matter of fact, it looks pretty terrible from a cash flow perspective. So definitely more of a flip situation, but just like with the flips, you can edit anything that you see in orange. And just like with the comps, after you've finished all of your analysis, including the flip numbers, including the rental numbers, you can click save, and you'll be able to reference your numbers specifically in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off now. Looks like we don't have any specific properties to analyze in the chat or specific questions. So reach out in the next, few seconds if you've got one. And other than that, I will see you all on Thursday, next Thursday at 7:30.